Hello, everyone. Welcome to EAQA Meetup number 5. Thanks, everyone, for joining. For those who haven't been to one of these events before, I'm Ryan. I'm a software tester, and I co-organize the East Anglia Quality Assurance meetups with Giri, who's also here. So the purpose of these meetups is to kind of just listen and share ideas about quality and testing and test automation and everything in that area of development. And yeah. Today I'm excited because we're joined by Carlos Kidman. So Carlos is a test automation university tutor. He's a speaker. He's the creator of Pylenium, which is a Selenium wrapper for Python. He also hosts the Ministry of Testing podcast, is founder of QA at the Point, and is a DevOps Days board member, as well as being a QA manager. So I think we're really lucky to have him join us all the way from Utah. And today, Carlos is going to give his talk, Devs Should Love Your Tests. So without further ado, let me pass you over to Carlos, and we can get started. Did I miss anything off that list?
Nah, dude. I don't even feel like I have to do an intro anymore. Like
no. Yeah. You can fill in the blanks.
Yep, build it. We're good.
Yeah. Cool. There we go.
All right. Hopefully, y'all can see my screen. Let me get this going. There we go. Oh, man, we went to the infinite. Went right into the infinite. Let me switch over to this and let's do this thing. All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. Really, really appreciate it. Yes, it's nice and sunny here in Utah, and things in the testing world I think are going great. So today, yes, I'm talking about devs and testing. I say devs should love your tests, but they should just love testing overall. Shoot. In my opinion, testing is the one thing that really changes the game when it comes to software development. Like everything around SRE, testing. Anything around DevOps, testing. Like everything's testing at the end of the day. And so it's something that like we just need to spend some time to get them to understand, you know. Anyway, so I don't want to like introduce myself anymore because I feel like that's already done for me. So yes, instructor on TAU, Ministry of Testing podcast. I'm an open source developer. I've created Pylenium and Selenium and Pack Sharp, and I'm looking to contribute to Report Portal next. And then founder of QAP, which is the testing community here in Utah. Okay. Get ready to ask your questions, y'all, because we're about to go through a ton of content, and I hope some of it is insightful and helpful for y'all. As always, like post your questions here in the chat. Hopefully I can get to them. I would love to answer them in real time, or we can obviously wait to the very, very end and I can answer them too. So we'll start with this. Every single client that I've ever worked with, they all want test automation, right? We all want CI/CD, we want the automation, yet every single time that they get introduced or they hire a team or they want to dive into it, it's always treated as a lower objective, and there's always unrealistic expectations. So a great example of this is, hey, we need automation, and how about I give you a month? I think that should do it, right? Let's give you a month to get all the tests going. We need 100% code coverage as well. How long is that going to take? And you're like, say what? Like, hold on real quick. Like that's a big ask. I'm like, oh, so like 2 months? And it's just kind of funny because like in their mind, like testing is such an easy thing that it is a lower objective. It is, well, I got to code this thing. I got to get this feature out first. and then I can test it later. Or it feels kind of redundant to test it when I already looked at it. I'm just a good developer, so I don't really need to test this thing. And every single client, without fail so far, has done this, which is kind of, it's unfortunate, but hey, it's just, I guess, how it works. So we have this team structure, this cross functional team, right, where every single one of these columns is a discipline, and every row is that cross-functional team. Depending on the company you work at, they may call it different things. Like, for example, we call them experience teams because every one of these cross-functional teams was in charge of an experience in the application. But what's a problem that you see with this diagram? For me, the first thing that stood out was there is a single tester on this entire cross-functional team. And yet you have front end, you have back end, you have Android, iOS. Like for people that have done testing for just mobile devices, that's a full-time job just by itself, right? So how is it possible that one tester can test everything that this team needs, especially when we're trying to release who knows how many times a day, right? It's not possible, right? At Workfront, the company I work for right now, they said, well, we can solve this by just putting a second tester. There's 2 testers now. That should solve the problem. And of course it didn't, right? And so it requires a different way of thinking in order to have testing still be an integral part of this team, even though you have 1, 2, or sometimes 0 testers, right? So we have this testing manifesto. This was created to kind of help testers in the new world of agile testing, right? So we value testing throughout over testing at the end, preventing bugs over finding bugs. And that one's kind of interesting, right? It's sometimes kind of, it's got some contention just because people say, wait a second, I'm a tester. My whole job is to break things. My whole job is to find these bugs. That's why they pay me. In my opinion, no, I don't want you to find things. I would love for our automation to find things. And if you find something, is that something because of the power of human-centric testing, or is that a weakness in our automation? Or, you know what I mean? Like, I would rather prevent things to get it out the door as quickly as possible over finding them, right? That sucks. No one wants to find bugs. So preventing bugs over finding them, testing understanding over checking functionality. Checking functionality sounds like a pretty easy given for test automation, right? Like I definitely want my automation to check functionality, but testing understanding, that's something that might be really difficult for automation to do, and where human-centric testing comes into play. Building the best system over breaking the system, and then the team responsibility for quality over just the tester responsibility. So here's a question I want to pose to y'all. Do you think that testers should know how to code? And if they don't, they are not a good tester anymore. They're not a modern tester if you don't know how to code. What do you think? Take a second to kind of munch on that, and boom, the hook is in. Well, this is interesting. I guess you can't see my whole, hold on real quick. Oh, everything got shifted over to the left, so that's good. All right, let me bring these in. Sorry about this, everyone. Wow, everything got thrown over. Woo. I love that. All righty then. Slides on the fly, that's what I'm talking about. So the Dev TestOps Manifesto, hopefully y'all follow Lisa Crispin already from testingindevops.org. She's also the author of quite a few books with her and Ben and Gregory and some others. They came up with this Dev TestOps Manifesto because we have the testing manifesto, which was kind of guidelines for human-centric testing, but we needed something more so for testing all around and also automated testing, right? So number 1 is continuous testing over testing at the end, which was the same as the previous manifesto actually, right? But do we actually know what that means? Continuous testing over testing at the end. Because even though we say this, time and time again, I see quality teams still testing at the end. So they're not actually following rule number 1 in the manifesto. Number 2 is embracing all testing activities over automating everything. Right? Another thing that I see that's very common is we need to automate all the things. Everything has to be unit test, mock everything, We don't have time for usability testing or accessibility or human-centric. We just have to get it out the door. And if we can't automate it, then it's not worth testing it. A huge anti-pattern, in my opinion. Number 3 is testing what gives value based on customer usage over testing everything. This alone gives you priority, but how do you know what customer usage is? Are you just using something like Google Analytics and that's how you get your usage? Because that's not actually usage, by the way. How are you actually prioritizing what gives value and you're testing because of it? Interesting. Number 4 is the whole team approach to testing over testing in silos. This goes for like devs and testers, right? It shouldn't just be the throw over the wall thing and the testers you test, because that means that you're testing at the end. But also I've seen where you have a team of automation engineers and a team of testers. And that right there is a silo, right? You have one team that if all they do is automate tests, they're losing a lot of the value that the human-centric side of testing brings in. How do I know that I'm automating the right things? How do I know that I'm testing the right things? Or am I just a zombie following a test case and automating that, right? I don't have any opinion there. I just get a task and say, complete this task, Carlos, and I just code it. Like that to me doesn't sound very fun. That doesn't sound like a tester to me. That sounds like a developer that's just given acceptance criteria and just don't ask questions, just code it, right? Number 5 is product coverage over code coverage. This is a huge piece because code coverage is something that developers do, right? They want to get to 100% code coverage, cool. Even if they did, as a tester, that would not give me a whole lot of confidence. Why? Because you've seen developers write tests. Some of them are not the best at it. And so they could easily gain that system. If you're using something like a code cov, for example, that measures code coverage, do you know how easy it is to actually gain that? It doesn't tell you how good the test is. It doesn't tell you how many there are. It doesn't tell you what it's actually testing. It just says you've covered this line with something. And that's all that metric gives you. So as a tester, that doesn't help me a whole lot, right? It makes them feel good, great, but it doesn't give me any confidence. Where product coverage is coming from the user's perspective and then going down that pyramid, right? What behaviors do we actually care about? What's the purpose of this feature actually? And that right there is we're covering those pieces. That is product coverage. So combining both of them, product coverage and code coverage, that is a more holistic view of what your app is trying to do and the coverage of it, right? Good stuff, good stuff. So what are some things we can do leading up and down? I bring this in, God, I love it. Yeah, so are all my slides going to be shifted to the left? Oh, see what I did there? Shift left. Let's go. I'm just kidding. Wow, everything's going to be to the left. Well, let me do a quick check over here. Oh, it looks good. Okay. So number 1 is honestly audit where your testing is right now. This might be tough if you're like, if it's you and like a few other testers, because it's your baby. You have to like point at your baby and say, what's wrong with you, baby? So I can understand that might be difficult, but it's why I highlight the word honestly, because you really need to say, where are we? And one of the easiest ways that you can do this is by asking your team, ask your developers, on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you in our testing right now? If you just ask that, you might be really amazed as to what they say. For example, I did this at Workfront when I started about a year ago. And when I asked that, the testers said, oh, I'm an 8, I'm a 9, I'm a 10, right? Especially the people that were 10s were the people that wrote the framework and they wrote the tests, right? They were all 10s. Oh yeah, our framework's amazing, super great. The developers, the highest score I got was a 3. Right? Very interesting, completely polarizing views on this. The testers were a lot higher because they had visibility into what the testing was doing. The developers had no idea what was being tested. And so because of that lack of knowing what's going on, well, it's understandable that they gave such a low score. They just know that testers are testing something. I don't really know what happens once I throw it into that black box. And they either tell me that it passed or they give me a bug and I try to fix it, right? that right there, well, that's not really leading up and down, right? You're not leading your team. You're not showing them or making it visual as to what's going on. Number 2 is prioritize coverage and measure progress. Prioritizing coverage, we can't automate everything, so you have to pick and choose. And how do you pick and choose? Well, in the last slide, when we talked about the DevTestOps manifesto, we talked about prioritizing based off customer usage, right? What things do the customers tell us is high priority? Cover those things first. We have our own idea. We can use that as well as what the customers are telling us and come up with a nice strategy that is a balance between both. But then you measure the progress. If I'm at 15% coverage on this feature right now, or on this part of the application, how am I going to get to 30%? Is that something I want to get within this next sprint? Is that something I want to get in a month? In this quarter, do I want to get to 60% or 100%? And measure that coverage, because that's going to show you not just how you're doing, but it also keeps you accountable. It's also a number that you can make visual to people above you, to the side of you, and below you. And it just gives, again, that visibility is such a powerful tool that will raise that confidence. Even if the coverage was 15%, if the developers knew we were at 15%, their numbers would go from 3 to a 4 or 5. Oh, actually, on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm a 5 now, because I at least know where we're at right now. Make it visible to your team. Shoot, I keep saying it over and over again. A whole bullet point for it too. And then collaborate with your developers. I got ahead of myself, but collaborate with your developers, right? They should be part of it. Otherwise, they're going to stay at 1, 2, and 3. They'll never go above that because they have no idea what you're doing. So this is a way that we handled this at my previous company. It's called Jane.com. We were an e-commerce platform. One of the most important pieces of our application was the ability to leave a review. And the reason why that was so important was because we were just a platform, and sellers would put their products on our platform and then sell it to customers, right? We just provided that and some other professional services as well. So we wanted someone to be able to leave a review, because they would complain at us and say, hey, Jane, you messed up my order, when it wasn't us at all, right? We were kind of like the middleman. But we wanted a way for them to talk to us and be able to get that information back to the seller in case they didn't know who the seller was. So we had this. We visualized this thing. And instead of just talking about, oh, we think it's covered, once we visualized the steps, we saw what we were actually covering and what we weren't covering. You'll notice that this has shades of green because this was very much a heat map. So we knew the flows that customers were taking more than others. So here, this cancel review is almost completely white because it was very rare that a customer would click, I want to leave a review, and then say, oh, just kidding, and click cancel. That happened so rarely that it was basically a white box. Now, the only a star rating is another option where if they didn't want to leave a comment or select a fit, they could just pick a star and leave no comment, right? And so here we can see that every single one of these S's, that is referencing a Selenium test. So we had a UI test covering that flow. We learned from this that we weren't covering cancel a review. We also weren't covering that they only leave a star rating. They don't actually select a fit, or they don't leave a comment either. They just pick a star 1 through 5, right? So we said, okay, here's how we're seeing it as a testing team. Here's how we see the flow, and here's how we see the current coverage. Developers, how do you see it? We showed them this visualization, and they were able to then say, okay, if this is how you see it, whoa, this is way different than how we saw it. Right? For them, they were looking at the stars and saying, all right, I got to make a component test for the stars. And we said, wait a second, you're making component tests for the stars? I said, yeah. We go, whoa, we're in the same place, same area here. Let's work together to get this coverage to the right place. Well, that got us to this. We started changing some things around and saying, well, if we choose a star rating, let's have that just be a component test. There's no need to create 5 Selenium tests, 1 for each star rating. User can do 1-star rating. User can do 2-star rating. User can do 3-star, and so on, right? And have 5 different Selenium tests just to pick a star rating is probably not the best use of our time, right? It's probably the wrong use of the UI layer, where instead we could test that very, very quickly at the component layer. So we started adding these. We had APIs, which is the A, C for component. We started putting these on. And then once we saw the choose star rating now has a C and an S, Then we could audit the test again and say, wait a second, if we have the component test, this is now duplicate coverage of my Selenium test, and it's covering more than my Selenium test. We could do a code review of those tests and make sure that test is doing what we want. That looks great for developers, looks great for testers. We no longer need the Selenium test, and we deleted it. Right? All of this just because of a visualization. All of this just because we were coordinating with our developers. So test automation is a programming project, treat it like one. It sucks that we have to explicitly say this, but we have to because of all those lower, people treating it like a lower objective, unrealistic expectations, they don't treat it like a programming project. For them, it's kind of like this, this side thing on top of the real programming, right? Which is not the case at all. And until your developers are helping you with test automation, they just won't feel that either, right? They'll think the same thing. But time and time again, once developers start actually jumping into test automation, they go, oh my gosh, this is really difficult. And I go, well, yeah, you think so? Like, this is why I get paid the big bucks, friend. Like, this is not easy to do. This is really difficult. I'm building applications just like you are. My applications just happen to be testing things, right? They just happen to be checking things, monitoring things, watching things, but it's still a programming project. And until they dive in, they don't have that empathy. Once they see it and they feel the pain, I promise you, your developers will empathize with you. And empathy will change your entire organization. So treat it like a programming project. Here's a very, very simple just visualization of a pipeline, right? It's super linear. I understand that there's, I get that. It's just a way to talk about this. But here, agile development is the ability to code and build and throw it somewhere, right? I think that a lot of organizations, this is what you learn in school, right? You learn how to code it, you learn how to build it, and then hopefully you learn how to throw it somewhere, right? Okay, now it's off my machine and it's over here now, right? But I would say like 70% of organizations are agile development, where the rest is now continuous integration, where you include integrating it, which is more so than just throwing it somewhere, integrating, because now you're composing different services together, and then testing those things. That's continuous integration. And fewer companies are at that. Why do you think that is? Why is that next step from agile development to CI so difficult? Munch on that for a bit, because it's such an interesting phenomenon. But one of the reasons is, well, like we talked about, just investment. It just seems like they don't invest as much into the pipelines. They don't invest as much into testing, right? Or to making their environments and configurations stable. They don't think about those things. It's an afterthought. They care more about get this feature into production, right? Continuous delivery is now after the testing, you're able to get it into a releasable state, right? So you don't have to, it doesn't have to go make it to production, but you could push a button and get it to production. That's great for companies like gaming companies. My company, Workfront, does that because we want to kind of coordinate a release, right? We want to make a big marketing deal of it. All right, hey, everyone, in this new version, you're going to be getting this and this new feature, and we all get all excited about it, right? That's continuous delivery, where continuous deployment is you're just sending it to production once it's ready. If it passes everything, just production, please. And it just goes there. And that's what we had at Jane. We would release about 15 to 20 times a day. And once it passed all testing, it was just in production now. And we didn't really mind that. And then DevOps is now the operating side as well, where once it's deployed to production, you're now doing things like observability. You're learning, you're gaining insights. You're not just being reactive anymore, you're being proactive. Customers are doing this. Why are they doing that? Here's my hypothesis. I believe if we do A versus B, this is gonna happen. Let's try it out in production. And now you're operating it, right? It's more almost like this automated monitoring, learning, tracing, that kind of stuff is the operation side. And that part is DevOps, because now we're looking in production to make sure that our hypotheses all the way from the beginning of the pipeline, they're actually true. We built this for these reasons, that actually happened. We're operating now in production. So your pipelines are a product too. They really are. I mean, it's the thing that is getting your code into production. So why not take a lot of care of this? And as testers, we want to make sure that the pipelines are high quality as well, right? So that, oh, shoot, we're bringing all these different things we got to worry about, right? So if we were to look at this, let me go back to this. If we grab this testing piece, I grab that testing piece, and then I do like a Tony Stark, I kind of like throw it out there. All right, Jarvis, like expand this thing. It would look kind of like this, right? You have this beginning, which is the left-hand side. You have this trigger CI/CD pipeline. Something triggers your tests. Triggers your test runner. Your test runner will grab all the tests you need and then send it into your test automation framework. Your framework will then do all the frameworky things. Right, your setup, you maybe spin up containers, maybe you seed data, you call APIs, you hook up integrations, whatever it is, you set up, you then execute the tests on whatever application or system under test you have, and then you clean up. If it passes, cool, just notify your watchers. If it doesn't pass, let's gather some information, gather some logs and other artifacts, bundle that up and send that to the watchers, and back up the pipeline you go. This doesn't just have to be for UI automation, by the way. It's really just, that's how the anatomy of a test framework, it has to be able to do that. And so we want to make this piece so flexible that we could plop it into any part of a pipeline and it would work that same way, right? But we also want it to be immutable enough where it's easy to control. Because if it's too dynamic, it's hard to control, right? It's too mutable. If it's more immutable, then it's more of a plug and play, and now it's easy for anyone to use, right? If something is mutable, let's say like a tool, right? Let's get a tool like Splunk, for example. Tools like Splunk, the power behind them is that they're this big old data lake. You can log anything you want, and you just have a huge data lake of just stuff, right? Just a bunch of entries. But it's up to the users to do the queries, write the queries, create the dashboards, create all, like, it's up to the users to create everything. So its flexibility is also its biggest weakness, because a developer might see that as friction. They don't want to have to learn a whole new query language, how to use this entire tool. That might be difficult, actually. And so they may opt in for a tool like Sentry that gives you a lot of what Splunk has, but the usability is just, it's so much easier to use that they log into Sentry more and they use that more. Same concept applies to this. We want flexibility, but if it's too much of a sandbox, developers are not going to use it, so they're not going to like it. So again, immutability is greater than mutability in this case. Test automation infrastructure should make it easy for anyone, again, developers as well as testers, product managers, shoot, anybody. It should make it easy for them to create, maintain, run, and consume your tests and test results. It should literally be a breeze. Just, oh, it failed. Why did it fail? Let's investigate, right? Whew. All right. So what should I do? I'm so glad you asked, because there's even more points that we can give you here. Let's go through them real quick, just so we don't run out of time. Number one is be visible and deliver. I hope that at this point, it's like, all right, Carlos, you said be visible like 30 times, man, like chill. Be visible and deliver, straight up. The way I like to think about this is good old Pikachu and Ash Ketchum. Hopefully you all know Pokemon. If you don't, that's too bad. But Pikachu and Ash Ketchum, inside of the TV show, the interesting thing about them is, number one, he's been like 10 years old for like 30 years. But there's episodes where Pikachu is super, super strong. Like he kicks dragons' butts, and you're like, holy cow, this dragon is like 10 times his size, and yet with one thunder shock, he defeats it, right? But then there's other times when he loses in the weirdest cases, like he'll trip over something and then get hit by a plant, and the plant will just slap him and he's dead, right? Like he's very inconsistent. It's not visible how powerful he actually is, right? And that makes for a sad time. Ash Ketchum is the same way. Right? There's times when he makes really cool decisions. You're like, wow, Ash Ketchum, what a great Pokemon trainer. And there's times when he just makes the stupidest decisions. And you're like, okay, yeah, the truth of friendship. And I'm sure there's a lesson that you learned in the episode. But it's super inconsistent. It's not visible how powerful either of them are, right? Imagine if there was a version of Pikachu that was visibly powerful, that we could actually see how powerful he actually is. That would make you a lot more confident, right? What if Pikachu looked like this? Right? What if Pikachu looked like that? This Pikachu looks hella swole, right? Like that, you can see that he's been working out. You can see that he's probably a really powerful Pikachu. And even look at Ash's face, right? Like even he's like, yeah, go do things, right? Because he's confident that this Pikachu is going to defeat whatever Pokemon's on the other side of this image. Now, yes, that's a little jokey, but the concept though applies. If you feel like your testing is amazing, wow, I bring so much value, but that value is not visible, then how much value are you actually bringing? Because that's hidden value, which in my opinion as a manager is no value at all, because I can't brag about you. I don't know what you're working on. And is it up to me to have to ask you what you're doing, or are you leading up and making things visible and collaborating with others to make it visible, to deliver on those things and measure that progress, right? Okay. Tests should be atomic and pragmatic. Atomic meaning that they're testing the least amount possible. You want them to be nice and small so they're more deterministic, but pragmatic in the sense that you're coming from as close to the user's perspective as possible and then going down. So if we look at this pyramid here, pragmatism would be manual, right? That's human-centric testing. That's pragmatic because that's straight up what our customers are doing. But we don't want everything there, and so we start going down the pyramid. Is this a UI test? Should it be integration? You start going down until you land at the right level. A lot of the problems that I see is that people will start from unit testing and then go up. That's a huge no-no. The reason why you don't do that is because as you start writing your unit test, you're going to start writing tests for everything you possibly can, mocking everything. And for the most part, you're going to leave your testers out of the scene, right? So you're just testing everything, which, as we've talked about before, you don't have time to test everything, which is why developers usually don't do that. And so if we want to say, let's prioritize our testing based on customer usage, can I do that at the unit level? No, right? We're doing that from the human-centric, the top of the pyramid, and then we try to get it down. As teams get better at this, you can probably start at integration, start at APIs, cool. But for people starting out, start from the top of the pyramid and say, here's the things that we care about the most, and now push it down. Now, what level is best at? I think this is best at the integration. Nope, this should be a Selenium or a Cypress. Nope, this should be a unit. Nope. But coordinate so that you get something like this. Another tip, each test should run within 60 seconds. This is more so for UI tests because you don't really have this problem at the lower levels. Hopefully not, at least. But for UI tests, your test should never take longer than 60 seconds. If it is, you are testing way too much. It's not atomic anymore, right? It also helps when you're dealing with things like GCP or AWS, your spot instances, they charge you by the minute. And so if all my tests run within 60 seconds, then that's very easy for me to say, well, if I have 100 containers, I can run 100 tests and still do that within 60 seconds. So how many spot instances, what's the cost? That's math you can do on your fingers, right? So each test should run within 60 seconds. Tests should stay in the stack. So if I have a Java backend and the React front end, then you should probably be using Java and using JavaScript, right? And it's one of the reasons why tools like Cypress are becoming so popular, where before, in the before, automating with JavaScript was a pain in the butt. It was my least favorite language to code in because of just the asynchronous nature of it. It's just not suited well for test automation. And so tools like Cypress, for example, came in and was like, no, we'll wrap everything in promises for you with this really nice clean syntax. And that way you can stay in the stack. Well, it's gaining tons of popularity because of that, and rightfully so. It's doing that very, very well. Where on the Java side, we should be writing our integration, our services, our unit tests, all in Java. There's a lot of reasons for that. Number one, it helps you integrate your developers, right? So even though I'm a big fan of Python, if my backend is Java, my front end is JavaScript, I'm going to pick those languages and work in those languages, right? I want the work to be done with my developers. I don't want to be writing tests. I want them to do that, right? So I want to make sure we stay in the stack so I can leverage my team rather than isolating them by saying, all right, I'm going to do Ruby though, because I know Ruby. You isolate your team and you've just created a silo. You've created friction and yada, yada, all the things that we've talked about. You're doing the opposite of those things, right? So I can understand when you need to do that. So I'm not saying that you can't. That's why I say tests should stay in the stack. But think of it as a best practice. You want to integrate your devs. You want to make it easy for them. The second part of this is that your infrastructure team or your automation team, we're building pipelines. We're building these services, the reporting, the tooling, and we're doing it for the Java and for the JavaScript. So if you introduce a new language like Ruby, we now have to build everything to now work with your Ruby code. Again, you're adding friction, not just to your developers now, you're adding friction to infrastructure and SREs. You're adding friction everywhere because you're not staying in the stack. Technical designs should be reviewed by QA and devs. So instead of technical designs just being done by developers, testers should be involved in that as well. Your technical design is basically your test plan, because they're saying, here's why we're doing it, here's what we're doing, and you get to say, well, what about this? Well, what about this? What about that? What about that? And at that point, you can start poking holes and doing your QA thing, right? If you wait until everything's been solidified and then you get the technical design, you poking holes just comes off as kind of annoying, right? It doesn't come off as valuable because you're not helping create the technical design. You're only critiquing the technical design, which is still a good thing, but again, it's kind of late in the process and it's not as helpful. On the inverse of that, you should integrate your devs and InfraOps into your testing strategies. Again, hopefully this is super obvious now that I've been talking, but your developers should know. That'll get them from, on a scale of 1 to 10, from a 3 to an 8, a 9, a 10, integrating them. They can help out. They can solve problems that maybe you don't know what to do with because that's just what they do. They're developers, right? For InfraOps, they have to harness your testing automation, your test automation, and they have to plug it into the pipelines, plug it into the services. They have to watch it. They have to monitor it. Like all that different stuff that they're doing, you want to work with them so that you have a seamless transition into the pipelines. So working with both of these is going to help you in your testing strategies as well. Again, don't isolate, don't isolate. Tests should be trustworthy. Wow. Sounds obvious, and yet I have to call it out so explicitly because, well, we still have things like this. So who has experienced this before? 50% of tests are passing. Well, let's just push to production anyway. I half joke here because I've actually seen this happen many times. And 50% is pretty high for some of these companies. 50% passing, push anyway. How about this one? Ignore the tests so the pipeline passes. You run the pipeline and maybe 1 or 2 tests fail. Instead of fixing it, let's just ignore them and run it again. And it passes this time. Oof. And another one, adding retries to your tests. The issue with adding retries to your tests is that it will hide the actual problem with the tests. And it might not even be the test itself. It could be the environment or application that is bad, right? The other problem with this is that if you're adding retries to your tests, that means that you yourself do not trust your tests. So how can you expect your developers to trust your tests? Dang, right? Test failures should be meaningful and actionable. Meaningful and actionable. So if we look like something at Report Portal.io, what they've done, and I think a pretty good job of, is when you get a failure, you're able to categorize what the failure is. Because a lot of the time, it's not a flaky test. It may look like a flaky test, but that flaky test is actually a flaky environment. We have this problem at Workfront where we used a lot of iframes. And people were trying to use thread.sleeves, trying to synchronize with the application. Because what kept happening was we would switch to the iframe, and then all of a sudden we get stale element references. So they said, okay, let's ignore that exception. Let's do this instead. What if we just wait for 5 seconds? That way we make sure that like the iframe is really loaded and then switch to it. And they tried doing all these bad things, band-aids basically, adding retries as well because they don't really know if it's going to work this time or not. When in reality, the whole problem was in the iframe, we kept re-rendering the iframe. Every time a call was made in the back end of the application, it would re-render the iframe. that was the issue, but we didn't see it as that. Or I shouldn't say we, but the testers that were working on it, they didn't see it as that. They were so used to the test being the problem that they were working day and night to figure out how can we make the test pass. That's what they cared about. Until eventually, one of my new testers came in and looked at the test and said, wait a second, I know this works. How come it's getting a stale element reference? As I started looking at it, opened the dev tool, started seeing things, grabbed a developer. Hey, developer, check this out real quick. How would you automate this piece? And they helped out. Oh, wait a second. Holy crap. Let me look at my code. And that's when they saw the re-rendering. We fixed the re-rendering issue. And all of those Band-Aids that they wrote were now just dead zombie code. We deleted all of it. We didn't need any of that. And the test worked beautifully. So the test actually caught an application bug. But we didn't see it that way, right? Because we were so used to the test being bad. Oof, right? And I know this happens over and over again for a lot of people, not just Workfront. And so categorizing your test failures and not just saying that the test is flaky. Well, why is the test flaky? Is it actually an automation bug? Or is it something with the system? Is it something with the environment? Maybe it's something with the application. And trying to diagnose or investigate the problems so that way we're solving the right things, not just putting Band-Aids to our tests. Automation is more than just functional testing. There is a lot of exploring hypothesis analysis. Very true, right? And this is automation I'm talking about, right? Not just human-centric testing. If we take a look at this, right? We see the test automation infrastructure at the very, very top. It's kind of all these things put together. The green section, you can think of this as like your stages of tests, right? You have static analysis and unit tests. Then you go to your environment configuration. You probably want to do some like snapshots there, test things there. If everything passes there, then let's run our services, our APIs, our integrations. If everything passes there, now let's go to our higher end, the UI end to end, until we ultimately move to production. Then let's do our observability in production, right? The reason why you need this progression is if all you have is UI tests and a UI test fails, at the bottom of the screen, you'll see application bug, system bug, configuration bug, automation bug, environment bug. If a UI test fails, which one of those 5 is the type of bug it is? That can be really hard to figure out because a UI test has so many dependencies integrated at that point, it might be hard to diagnose which one of these is the actual cause, right? It may be hard to find out, okay, step H failed, but the reason it failed was because step D failed, right? In a UI test, it's harder to see. There's just so much happening, so many layers. It takes you a long time to resolve that. And we call that mean time to resolution, MTTR. You have a high mean time to resolution because a UI test failed and you have to spend all that time figuring out why that failed. And that's if the developers don't just skip it, right? Or mark it as failed and rerun the pipeline. So having this progression is helpful because if the static analysis and unit test fail, well, there you go. That immediately is your application bug or your system bug. Very easy to tell which one it is. If your environment configuration testing, those contracts and whatnot, if that fails, well, that makes it easy. My environment is misconfigured or the configuration, my toggles are misaligned. You're able to check that at that time, right? Services and APIs, that's almost 100% a system or configuration thing. And then you get to UI end to end. And hopefully at that point, now you're able to easily categorize what type of failures these are to be a lot more meaningful, a lot more actionable, and fix the right things. Tests should be easy to read and maintain. Let's take a look at this test. This is an actual test in production that we have at Workfront right now. This is Java. Take a few seconds and see if you can tell what this test is doing. I'll give you some time. For anyone that's in Cyprus, you're probably looking at this like, oh, this is why I left Selenium. One thing I want to point out here is the name of the test is Focus Moves to New Task After Saving Name of New Project. So that's what the test is called, and yet it's very hard for me to see that actually happening in the test. Not to mention, this got marked as a failing test, so it's not even running anymore. Feels bad. All right. Hopefully, whoever was able to actually figure that out, good job, high fives. Let's look at another test. These two are now in Python. Can you tell me what these tests are doing? Let's do the first one. Test a user can change the project status to complete. We're on the project page on the header. Change the project status to complete. Let's get the project status. It should have the text complete. If we get the project completion, it should be 100% now because we marked it complete. And that's the test. Right? That's literally it. This test is much easier to read and much easier to maintain. And guess who wrote that first test? A developer did. No one on my team did that. A developer wrote it because they found out that as they were writing their component test, this was an integration that their component test could not do easily. So for them, it was easier to write a test at the UI layer to handle this. So that way they felt confident in that integration. And it took them 3 lines to achieve that. And this is not that like abstracted, by the way. It's not like there's a bunch of things happening in the background. No, like every line that you see py.get, for example, for anyone that uses Cypress, that should be super readable. You probably know exactly what that's doing. This is using Pylenium, by the way. The second test issue summary panel updates when issue is selected. Same thing. I get my issues, I go to the issues and open my summary panel, open the issue summary, and the header item name it shouldn't be none. There should be something there. They don't actually care what's there. They just care that something is there, right? Which is kind of hilarious. And yet that's what the team agreed to. That's what they needed for this test. This test was written by a tester with 0 programming experience. It should be easy for anyone to read, write, and maintain your tests. Here's a page object. I couldn't even put the whole thing on here because the page object was so massive. I just grabbed like a piece of it. So here it is. Again, this is Java, but we have things like click on export button. Like if we just look at this first function, the first function says public string get task bubble assignment by index I. My list of web elements assignments is equal to root element find elements by CSS selector. My ID starts with assignee avatar. Return assignments get whatever index get text. So that's how I do that. And then you can see things like the third function, click on edit button, all the things they're doing just to click on an edit button. Same thing for click cancel, same thing for click on save. All the stuff they have to do just to click on a button, right? Where in Pylenium, you'd just be like that. You find all the elements that start with the ID of assignee avatar, whatever the index is, throw it in there, .text. Much more readable, much easier to use and understand. And I don't have to write a whole function for it. It's just built into my framework. This is a page object using Pylenium. So here we have our projects page, and you can call it page object or component object, whatever you want to call it. But this is what we need for the project page. We have our section of selectors, which are just constants. Here's the name with the string. And then my actions. I can visit this. I can create a new project. I can wait for the page to load. And it's organized like that. We follow that same pattern for all of our pages and component objects. And so I can have developers or testers jump in and say, I know how things are structured. I can follow the same pattern. And it's very easy for me to use. Which is why they can write tests. And again, someone with no programming experience writes tests. My developers can jump into a framework they know nothing about and write tests. See, that's what I'm talking about. The very, very last thing is this. Don't let testing or processes get in the way of quality. I heard this from Alan Page and Brent Jensen in their A/B testing podcast. And it's one of the things that has really stuck with me. Don't just process for processing's sake. Don't have that meeting just because it's a meeting that's always been there. Like audit the process, audit the practices. Is this actually giving us value or not? Is this actually something I enjoy doing or not? If I don't, why not? And how can we make that better? Same thing for testing. Don't just testing for testing's sake, right? Otherwise, you're going to do the whole unit up. Unit testing all the way up is just testing for testing's sake. We're writing tests to get 100% code coverage. That's the wrong reason to test, right? So don't let testing and processes get in the way of quality. All right, y'all, that's it. This is my Twitch stream. I do it every single day. Please join if you'd like. I answer any questions or challenges. And that's it. Thank you. I can stop sharing my screen, by the way.
Cool.
Oh, right on time too.
Just getting my my camera back up. Okay, cool. That was cool. Thank you.
I'm glad you thought it was cool. Yes.
Yeah. We have 3 questions. If you have, if you still have time to stay with us to.
Oh, of course. Only 3, huh?
Yeah, only 3.
Well,
there's
time. Amazing test automation.
Yeah. Well, if anyone else has got more questions, then you can get them in now. One of them's from me as well. So, have you had any issues getting developer buy-in to your tests, and what approaches do you take in sort of combating that?
So the first part of the question, do I have any struggle getting developers in on it? Remember when I talked about empathy and how if developers don't have empathy, they just, it won't matter to them, right? You'll have 2 different types of developers. You have developers that see testing as low value, and then you'll have testers that don't see it, like they see it as high value, right? There's almost never a developer in between. The developers that think of it as high value, we call these champions, right? They're quality champions because they're not a tester, they're a developer, but they understand the power of testing. It's probably saved their butts, right? These are almost always senior or principal developers because they just have that experience now. Where a junior developer is coming out of like a boot camp or a school, they haven't learned testing yet. And so when they find out about testing for the first time, it's hard to understand why it's valuable. It sounds like a waste of time. And I can understand that. So what I do is I train them. I actually give them, like, sit down with them, we do pairing, and we show them what the testing, how easy it is to be done, how they can include it, how they can be more test driven, more so than just writing functions and features. So it takes pairing, it takes showing them how we do our own testing as well. Because if you're a good tester, I have to say that just because sometimes testers are not very good. If you're a good tester, as they pair with you on testing, they're going to see the things that you're catching, the things that you're finding, the questions you're asking, what you're looking for. And I promise you that they will be super impressed by how you actually navigate the application. It's different from a developer's mindset. They're looking at solving the problem. How am I going to do it? Performance, or thinking about these kind of things. Whereas a tester, we're looking at the forest between the trees and how does this work with this? Was my customer actually going to see it the same way? Like, it's just such a different a mindset, but we don't want to isolate it, or else they're never going to see value in testing. They may not even know what you do. And so if we pair with them, they get immediate insight into how we do stuff. And they may say, oh, wow, that was really cool. And they might invite you to meetings because of it. So that is usually how I get rid of the, like, if I leave it to the developer to integrate with me, never gonna happen. This is not gonna happen. It's up to me as a tester to integrate testing into the team and include everyone on my team. So pairing is an amazing way to do it. If you have the technical skill, like the programming skill, pairing on how they write code too, right? It's helpful for you as a tester just to see it, but if you know how to write unit tests or component tests, or you know how to use Cypress or whatever, help them write those tests too. Just, that's how you get rid of that. It's straight up just making a relationship with people and showing them how they can integrate testing into their normal day-to-day and the value behind that. And they will catch on. I have not seen one developer not catch on, not get excited about testing eventually, because it saves their butt. The worst way to get empathy, sometimes it's the only way, the worst way to get empathy is for them to blow something up. And then they realize, oh, if only I had a test there. We're trying to stop them from running into that case. But sometimes, hey, you got to get burned to get empathy, right? So that's what I would do.
Cool. Just picking up on something you've said there. Is it mad that testing isn't really taught to developers? Is that, it seems strange to me that actually
it's insane.
That actually testing is kind of a new thing for developers, junior developers.
Yeah, so what I do here in Utah, I'm very integrated with the tech space here in Utah, right? The tech communities and everything, all the boot camps in the schools as well. So I do presentations just like this at universities and colleges and boot camps to talk about testing. I do workshops on it as well, to just show people like there's a different way of developing, a test-driven way to do development. And it's a great time to show people when they're barely starting out, because they're kind of just consuming things, right? There's the sponge at that point. And so I'm trying to change that. And I actually have a course that I'm going to be giving to high schools here in Utah. So that way our students, our youth, starting from like the age of 14 and 15, as they're getting into STEM programs or coding programs, testing is just part of the curriculum. And so I'm doing a lot of that here in Utah. Hopefully we can do the same thing around the world, right? Because it's not like I'm trying to make testers. No, I'm just trying to include testing into a full stack developer, right? Because in my opinion, you're not a full stack developer if you don't know how to test. You can't test your own stuff, you're not a full stack. You can build something and throw it somewhere, but you don't know how to test it. Like, that's not full stack, you know?
Yeah. Cool. Okay, moving on. We've got 3 more. I think you've kind of answered this one. Well, you have answered this one. Do you think that testers should use the same programming language which developers use for developing applications?
Yes. A short answer, yes. Yes, I think that is it's the easiest way to integrate your developers if you're doing it in like their own language, because they can help you out, right? And it's easier to then pair with them. They'll feel comfortable too. If we do it in a different language, they're not going to feel comfortable. It'll be harder for them to adopt testing, because if I want to do testing, I have to learn this new language. And even though for testers and automation engineers, we have to learn so many languages because we just have to, and developers don't have to. I also don't understand why that's the case. But oh, I'm a JavaScript developer for life. And I'm like, well, I had to learn Ruby, I had to learn PHP, I had to learn Java and C# and Python. Like, I had to learn all these languages just so I can work with y'all. And they only have to learn one. What the heck? But it reduces the friction for them adopting testing and getting excited about it. It's harder to get excited when I now have this new mountain I need to climb, because I'm already working on all this. I already have all these pressures for my company, my business, my boss. So I have to do all these things, and now you want me to learn this language as well as testing? Like, get out of here. You know, it's just harder for them to integrate. Now I say the should, right? Because there's obviously times when that may not be the case, or may not even be the best approach. At Workfront, we use Python for the InfraOps and testing side. So anything like SRE and whatnot, we use Python as our language. And so because of that, we are doing all of our UI automation is also in Python as well. But it's so easy to use that we have developers of all different languages using it. So we can get away with it. So that's why I say should. Like, there's times when you can definitely break that rule. But you have to make it real clean, make it real robust. Make developers jealous that you're not on their team coding with them. You know? Yeah.
Cool. Okay. How can a fresher know which language framework to learn to get a job in automation domain? I started using Nightwatch.js when W3C WebDriver was updated and was popular. So I guess the crux of that is, if you're starting out, where do you begin? Have you got any thoughts on?
Yeah, a lot of that is actually very dependent on where you live and the businesses around you. Just because, like, here in Utah, if you were a Java developer, look, you know, you're not gonna. There's not a lot of jobs in Java here. because we're modern. No, I'm just kidding. No, I'm just kidding. No, because we have languages like JavaScript, C#, and Python are the 3 dominant language here in Utah. And so if you knew that information, then you would probably pick one of those, right? Now, if you're looking to get into front-end testing, then I would definitely say do JavaScript. And I would do things like Cypress is a great one. I would rather use Cypress than any other JavaScript framework, including the Selenium ones. And I love Selenium. It's just Cypress is such a good experience for JavaScript for everyone, tester and developer included. And the community is also so amazing that you'll get support from your organization and you'll get support from the community too. So I would pick something that has that backing to help you out. If you're looking to get into just like automation engineering, JavaScript is actually not a very good language to start with. I would pick something like Python, because Python is just a very good language for everything. But I know that you can do a lot of stuff in Node.js. So that's why I say like you want to see what open positions there are, the current like state of where you live. And I would just say start Googling job applications. Be like, hey, I wonder if this company looks really cool. I'd love to work for them. What do they use? And if they don't have a job posting or something, what's stopping you from going to LinkedIn and asking one of them? Right? Like you can find people based on where they live, which is kind of creepy. You can find people based on the companies they work for, the titles they have. So one thing that I did here in Utah when I first started QA at the Point was I started searching for all the companies here in Utah that have the title of testing or QA in their name. And I got thousands of hits. And I just made a script in Python to just send them a message to all of them, right? So I send this message to all of them, invite them to QA at the Point, invite them to lunch with me, and let's get that conversation going. And as I did that, I started learning what they were using, the problems they were facing, all of that, right? So you'll have to do a little bit of research to find out first off, kind of what the market is like in your where you live, but also what tools are they using? Is every single posting asking you to know AWS? Then maybe you may want to spend some time there, or you know what I mean? Like it's good to be data driven, even when you're thinking about learning. You don't want to just learn whatever, or else you'll learn wide and you'll do rabbit holes over and over and over again, which is really just a waste of time. So I know it's kind of a long-winded answer, but it is kind of, there is, and it depends, because depending on where you're at, the market might be different. So I know a lot of testers will be like, hey, I want to do the UI layer because that's kind of the next natural step as a human-centric tester. And so tools like Pylenium, if you want to go Python, or Cypress, if you want to go JavaScript, both of those are just really good to do. And then just learn some programming fundamentals. Take a course or two about like data structures or whatnot in that language, and then just dive into the tool and do that. Make a really solid demo, and boom, you got yourself a job.
Cool. Okay. Last one. Do we need to have a separate budget for test automation and automation? So I get, I'm assuming this is compared to, as a company, how you manage, budgeting for test automation. I'm assuming. I guess the ideal is to treat a development team as inclusive of everyone, and not have necessarily a separate test automation budget. I think that's what he's getting at. But
okay, yeah, and that's a sign of a really mature organization where you get rid of those silos, right? Because we talked about getting rid of silos, and yet time and time again, an organization will have a testing team, like a dedicated QA department. And I can totally understand, again, depending on context, you may need that, right? Like if you have like a medical organization, there's a very different set of rules and laws you have to abide by. And so having a team dedicated to making sure you're compliant with those things would make 100% sense. So it can be very context driven as well. So in my answers, do make sure that you're thinking about context as well. And that's why I mentioned Jane being e-commerce and things like that, because we can get away with different things because we were an e-commerce platform, where someone who is more around like banking or Bitcoin or legal stuff or anything like that, like your organization has to abide by different rules and guidelines than mine has to. And that might change the structure of your team, right? Like something like Netflix and Spotify are able to get away without testers, quote unquote, even though they have SREs, which are testers. They're able to just have SREs because they can just deploy that quickly. Their services are not crucial, right? They're entertainment services. And so none of us we don't die if Netflix goes down for a day, right? They lose a bunch of money, but we don't die. Whereas maybe like a medical organization, there's things that they have to be super compliant with data privacy laws, GDPR and things like that, because they're dealing with customers or people's personal information. And if any of that leaks, that could shut the business down. And so because of that, they'll be a lot more meticulous. They'll slow down a little bit more just so they can make sure they have everything in place. And maybe that will require a dedicated team of testers or compliance engineers to make sure that's the case. So it can be very context driven. But as for budget, the only budget you really need is more so the tool set that you have. Because like ideally, you wouldn't need to have a whole like dedicated tester team, right? You may hire some consultants, right? And that's what you're hearing a lot of nowadays is like quality coaches, right? Testers should be coaches. Like you may have like a coach or consultant like that. But one good coach can help lead the testing strategy of multiple teams or an entire organization, depending on how big they are. Other things that would also come into it would be if the organization is not willing to let their developers spend time on testing, that's a very real problem as well. So if they're not allowing the developers to work on testing, they say no matter what you say, there's 100% feature work. There's no time to work on tech debt. Then you may need to hire an SDET or a software engineer that's focused on testing, or a tester, right, to help kind of solve that problem, because at that point it's more so a resource problem. It could also just be a priority problem because they think that what they're working on is higher priority than actually making the stuff, doing it right, right? So you have the whole concept of getting it done versus doing it right. Where in testers, we're trying to do it right, and developers and business are just trying to get it done. And we need the balance of both of them. And so sometimes it's just a priority problem. They're all focused on getting it done, and they don't want to spend time to do it right. And when you tell it to them like that, they have a hard time arguing that point. But that's just how it is, because they could make time, right? So saying, oh, we don't have time. No, you didn't make time for it. That's a different problem. In your opinion, this is higher priority, where testing is lower priority. Just say that. Just be honest, right? Just say that, because it's not a timing issue. You put time somewhere else. You allocated it to different things. So man, another long-winded answer is just, it depends, right? It just depends on the context, depends on the current maturity of the organization you're in. Are they willing to hire people for that? Do they want their developers to do it but never give them time to? There could be different problems in that, all the way from just priority problems or business problems to cultural people problems as well. It's tough to say without me going in and seeing what your business is doing right now. So big blanket answer, hopefully, to catch all that. But of course, be nice. Be nice when you poke holes in their plans. Oh, Ryan, I can't hear you, by the way. I think you're muted.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, thank you. Cool. That's all the questions done. Great. Good work. Thank you. Yeah, we really appreciate you. You coming along. It's great to hear you talk. So thank you very much. And I guess it's getting close to lunchtime there.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Thank you for having me again. Really appreciate it. Again, Again, I
Cool.
hope it was helpful. I hope it was at least you take something away and go, oh, very nice. I could try this next.
Nice. Yeah, it's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you very much. Thank you. For everyone else here, if you have other topics that you want us to cover, then as always, get in touch and we'll see if we can find the right people to cover them. Also, this is recording, so we'll put this out as well. So if anyone missed it or you want to rewatch it, you can. Cool. But I'll leave it there and I'll end the broadcast.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Carlos. Thank you. Cheers. Bye.